Now that we're less than 7 months away from this upcoming presidential election, let's look into how RFK affects this vote. Okay, so we have a three-way race between Biden Harris, Donald Trump, and an unannounced VP. And recently we've had RFK select a leftist millennial Asian woman, as in Nicole Shanahan. Now, what's important about this lady is that she is one of the most precocious Silicon Valley darlings that has support bases that are really important for fundraising to get on the ballot in all these 50 states that we have here. Now, recently, RFK has said that he's not going to run as a libertarian candidate, which is interesting. It kind of tells you that he's confident that he'll get on the ballots without libertarian access, and also that he's not leaning in that direction either. Now, as we know, the libertarians, by and large, has been taking votes from the Republican Party. In fact, you can see some states where Trump probably could have won Minnesota in 2016 had there not been Gary Johnson, etc. Now, what's important about this is that the libertarian candidate, in fact, in 2016, got double digits around New Mexico. And you can see that RFK is way bigger than that. So his impact on the election is going to be a lot more felt. And we're going to get right into the map now. As you can all see, of course, the map is empty, but what you'll notice right away is that I have the hot pink as RFK and Shanahan. And what you'll notice as well is that the race is not going to be localized. What I mean is that even though Shanahan might be from Silicon Valley and lives there, it doesn't mean that they're going to have an outsized vote share in that place. And California isn't even contested to begin with. But we're also considering that, let's say RFK comes from a Massachusetts family, we're not going to see that state having a specific impact in the Electoral College. So we're seeing this election through a vector of mostly popular vote share across swing states. Okay. Now, also, these swing states vary insofar as how much RFK has vote share. So, for example, a state like Georgia might have RFK at 6.7%, but we could have a state like Michigan where he has, let's say, 13%. And so it's important that we get into all the details that will surmise the election result coming up. As everybody can see here, Trump has a very, very, very tepid lead in the popular vote over Biden in a 1v1 race. But let's see how this gets impacted by adding in the different candidates. So obviously the third party candidate that is the most important is RFK. You can see that he has about a 9.3% vote share. Now, when I started making these videos, he was at 15. He's been steadily decreasing. In fact, a couple weeks ago, he was at 10 or 11%. Now he's at the bottom 9 percentile. So that's pretty rough for him. But to be fair, there's polls that have him at different amounts. So if you look here, you'll notice he'll be as high as 13 last month. But most recently, according to the NY Times, you have Kennedy down to 2 in this polling share, which is very, very strange indeed. But overall, you see that the average for him is 13, 12, 14, 11, 8, 11, 9, 8, 11. So overall, you'll say that his impact is about like a 10% across the country. So as we can all see here, going through his Twitter, you can see that the guy has certain planks that are Republican in nature, conservative, and liberal otherwise. So that's important to know because we need to know where he's going to take votes from exactly. So as we know, Ross Perot is known for having spoiled the election for George Herbert Walker Bush in 96, I believe. But the fact is, or 92, sorry. Basically, that didn't happen, okay? Bush lost by a lot, frankly, and so Ross Perot actually didn't hurt Bush as much as people think. But that could be a topic that comes up in 24. So anyway, to look into his policy on Twitter, you can see that he's reiterating the fact that he's being pretty strict on the EPA. He's saying better late than never to the EPA, having a warning against pesticides. So he's a very big green energy candidate, which is interesting because if you look at the race, of course, we have Jill Stein, who's making that her prerogative. But as you can see, her polling aggregate is way, way inferior and lesser than Kennedy's. If you look at it, she peaks at 4 and is as low as basically 0. So clearly she's basically a non-factor. But anyway, so in this video, he has an interview with Dave Rubin, who's a more centrist-leaning gay guy. And what you'll notice is that he'll say, and I'll just summarize it so just to save time, he says basically that inflation and in specific the debt is one of these issues that neither candidate will address. Okay, he's saying that we're in $34 trillion worth of debt and that we frankly as a country are not going to be able to sustain that, which seems to be very true. The thing is about that, of course, is that the guy in particular is saying that none of them will address this. And what that means is that the voters that are really caring about the debt, which is pretty much none of them, are going to say, you know what, I'm going to vote for Kennedy. What's important about this? Well, when you look at who is the best on the economy, it's clear that Donald Trump has a lead on that issue when you look at the polling. And if you look at the polling in respect to Joe Biden's approval over the handling of the economy, you'll notice really quickly that the guy is definitely underwater by terms of anywhere from 27 to 33% disapproval on the economy, which has to do part and parcel with the debt. So if you have a person that cares about the debt, they're either going to vote RFK because Biden is bad on that issue, but people that are Trump that go RFK, that's not going to exist over the issue of the debt, which is one of RFK's strongest talking points because people basically work off of heuristics in the subconscious. And the subconscious says that the economy was good under Trump and that the debt wasn't really a pressing issue back then. And therefore, they're going to vote Donald Trump. So for this to be an issue that takes away from Donald, it's not going to be the case. And it's going to be an anti-Biden facet for sure. So anyway, moving on to the next topic, we've got another one right here. So in this video, you'll see RFK detail why he's going to rebuild the wall. He's going to put surveillance cameras. He's going to get the catch and deport, basically the program that Trump had where we catch these people and deport them and send them back to their host countries. He's basically re-implementing that if he were to become president. So a lot of people might say that's a Trumpian policy and therefore people that vote for Trump are going to actually switch their vote to Kennedy. That's not true, though. The reason why is because there's a subset of people that would have voted for Biden had he not fumbled the border. And those people are going to vote for Kennedy thinking that, well, first of all, he said fence, not even a wall. So you can see that he's already softer in tonality or in intonation as compared to Donald Trump, which means that these people are most likely going to be wishy-washy in the border issue and are going to find RFK's platform to be the most amenable to them. So there's a subset of center-left people and centrists that would have voted Biden that are undecided currently that may just protest vote and put RFK on the ballot. So that's going to net more points away from Joe than Donald because the people that care about the border are going to see Donald's policy as being more strict than RFK's. And the rhetoric is definitely more hostile to immigration, which tells you, frankly, folks, that RFK is not going to siphon votes from Trump on that issue either. So economy, he's not taking from Trump, nor is he doing it on immigration, which are huge cornerstones. And what's another plank of RFK but the green energy climate initiatives and whatever have you. And that's definitely a leftist concern, not Republican. So you'll see how in three major vectors, he's sucking away from Biden, but not Donald Trump. All right, now this is a huge news flash for people, okay? So there's a retort that says that even though RFK is polling at 9.3% on the national polling, which is abnormally high for a third-party candidate, the third-party candidates poll higher than they actually perform in real life because when you put a metaphorical gun to someone's head, of course, they're going to actually pick one of the two guys that can win. But there's an issue here. Because even though obviously that's going to happen, it doesn't mean that the underlying stats are still the same. And so even though RFK might not get 9% of the vote in these swing states, he might get 5% or 3%. But of those, they're going to be taking away from Biden regardless. And again, these are states, if you're looking at the polling currently, that Trump is winning all of these, basically, aside from Pennsylvania by 0.1, which is an aggregation error if you look into the polling, reference my last video for that information. But overall, Trump is winning by 1.8%. So even if RFK's shrinkage goes all the way to even 1/3 of the people polled voting for either of these two, they're mostly going to vote for Trump anyway, when you look at it that way. So it's not a big problem to begin with. Now, looking into other facts, we've got more statistics to back up my claims. So if you look here, the people that are polled are tending to be non-voters that are pro-Kennedy. That is true. So that's an interesting facet. But even when you look at the people that are registered to vote in 24, it still leads for Biden losing votes to RFK. Isn't that interesting? What do I mean? Because this obviously contradicts what I'm saying. Well, what I mean is that even though if you look at the reality versus just hypothetical polling to voters and non-voters, Kennedy goes from, let's say, 16 to 12. Well, that's a factor of like maybe a 28% decrease in support. But that being said, of course, that's still a lot of votes regardless. So even if he drops down 4%, going from, let's say, 9 to 5, that's still more than Gary Johnson. And again, these are votes that are taking away from Democrats, not Republicans. Another factor, folks, women/independents are more likely to say they would vote for RFK Jr. than other people. Well, what are the people that Trump lost in 2020 that he had in 2016, theoretically? Well, it's women and independent voters. So you can see how the people that are supporting RFK are hypothetical Biden voters, but clearly they're pissed off with the way that he's been handling things. Isn't that very ironic? And again, most of these RFK voters are also white. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that these people are also more clued in. What do I mean? Well, look at this. This is very difficult to understand, but all Americans are, let's say, 61% on average white, okay? Whereas of the RFK supportership, it's 58%. So what that means is that there's more minorities supporting RFK than they are otherwise. Well, what that means is that obviously minorities, for the most part, vote Democrat. So his voter share is actually comprised of more Democrats and independents than Republicans. That's like matter of factly true. And in fact, when you're looking at the male and female disproportionality, again, only 39% of people support RFK that are male, whereas about 50% don't. Whereas with females, it's 62% in favor versus only 51 otherwise. So what that tells you is that women are more likely to vote by a factor of like 11% for RFK. Well, women vote Democrat on average. So what does that mean for you? Well, it means is that RFK takes more votes away from Joe Biden, like actually just as a fact. Now, this factoid is going to be the most difficult to understand for the layperson, but if you break down these numbers, it shows that Republicans are more likely to vote for RFK than illicit Democrats. But what this doesn't factor is that obviously Republicans, even though they're more open to, let's say, an RFK, they're still going to vote for Trump because they prefer him. And independents prefer RFK by a factor of 7%, whereas the Democratic split is only 5. So that'll overpower any sort of discrepancies with my argument, for one. And two, again, even if Republicans are more favorable and approving of RFK as a person, they were also very amenable to Vivek Ramaswamy in the primary, and yet they all fell in line to endorse Donald Trump at the end and vote for him in the primary when Vivek dropped out, because the people that supported Vivek were basically just trolling. They were just like, trying to pick the shiniest turd in the sea of garbage in that primary. And so that's exactly what happened. But everybody prefers Trump out of these people that I'm referring to. So ignoring the ad for a second, NBC News, which is clearly liberal, just take it from the horse's mouth itself, okay? Freaked out Democrats mobilized to stop RFK Jr. from cutting into Biden. So even the Democrats are afraid of RFK taking votes from Joe Biden. So there you go. That's just cut and parcel. I mean, that's obviously so true. It's facts. All right, so right now you're looking at the map with about 95% degree confidence interval, give or take a couple electoral votes. This is basically the swing state map that we're looking at. So right now we have Biden-Harris at 223, Trump at 222. So it's basically tied. Let's see how these polls are doing right now. So Arizona, according to RCP aggregate, has Trump winning by 5.8%, whereas RFK is only at 10.5. Okay, so he is pulling in different gauges here. So clearly you've got Fox with him at 10, Bloomberg at 12, Hill at 7, and Wall Street Journal at 13. You can average that out to, again, 10.5. So his influence is felt, but not by too much. So if you compare that to the two-way race, Trump still wins it by 4.5. But RFK definitely does help Trump by a factor of 1.3. So what that means basically is that about 20% of people that are pro-Kennedy are basically, like, how do I explain it? Okay, so Kennedy helps Trump by about 1.3 overall, and his support is about 10.5%. So what that means is that about 15% more Kennedy juice basically goes to Trump than it does Biden, if that makes sense. So like basically if you take him out, then those people are more desperate and will vote Biden, because more of the clientele for Kennedy will be liberal in their disposition. You can tell by the way that Kennedy chose his VP. That was the plan the whole time. So anyway, that is a red Arizona. Now, moving on to the next state, we're going to do Nevada since they're cousins. They're right next to each other. These two states, we have Trump on a 1v1, winning by 3.2. You make that a free-for-all, and then all of a sudden, Kennedy's lead jumps actually from 10.5 to 11.5. So a stronger third place, still a distant one. And Trump wins by 5.5. So he actually nets 1.7. So how much does he gain? He goes from 3.2 to 5.5. So he gains 2.3. So as you can see here, Kennedy increases his vote share and Trump does better, in fact, which is interesting. So you can see how Kennedy in these two states helps Donald Trump by a good amount, by the way. So you can see how the Kennedy vote is like a 60-40 would-be Biden. But because he's on the ballot, he's actually hurting the Democratic incumbent. Moving on, let's go to Wisconsin. Well, Wisconsin, in fact, has Trump up by only 0.6. Now, in a five-way race, you see that Trump is up by 1.6. So even in Wisconsin, he is helping Trump. Now, notice that it's still less than these southwestern states. You can see that how maybe Kennedy is more palatable to the Southwest, but we don't know. Anyways, moving on to Michigan, where Jill Stein may have cost the election for Hillary in 2016. We have we have Donald Trump versus Biden 1v1, and it has Trump up by 2.8. We look at the other facts. We have a five-way race, and then Trump's aggregate actually goes down to 2.2. Isn't that interesting? So while Kennedy's vote is down, Trump's vote also goes down, okay, by 0.6. Whereas in other states, Kennedy was as high as 11.5 and was helping out Trump by 2.8 or whatever it was. Now he's actually subtracting votes from Donald Trump, which is interesting. So there's a little bit of nuance here, where in the Rust Belt, Kennedy is not so positive for Donald Trump, aka the blue wall. But then over here in the Southwest, all of a sudden, there's a burgeoning hope for Donald Trump with this third-party inclusion. Pennsylvania is the one state that Trump is losing in the aggregate because of this BS poll you'll see here that has Biden up by 10, which is ridiculous. But looking at the facts here, we'll have a five-way race, and you'll see the numbers change very quickly. And Trump is leading by 2.2, which kind of shows that that maybe, Biden is actually not that good as a candidate. But anyway, so you can see how he helps here. Moving on, let's do North Carolina. Now, this one's going to be the most solid Republican out of all of them. Trump is leading this aggregate by about 4%. Now we look at the five-way race, and then all of a sudden, you see that Kennedy boosts them up by 2.3 to have a margin of 2.3. Sorry, of how much was it? 6.3. Sorry. Okay, the last state is going to be Georgia. We look at the Georgia polling on a 1v1 basis, and you have Trump up by 3.8, which is interesting because if you put Kennedy in there, all of a sudden he's at 5.6. So you see how these numbers are all over the place. So Trump jumps up 1.8% with Kennedy on the ballot, which makes it red, of course, and gives Trump 315 electoral votes to Biden's 223. Now, what is complicated about this, of course, is that Kennedy's vote share goes down to 6.7. So that's a really, really weird turnout difference. But anyway, in the swing states, Kennedy varies from 6.7% support to about 11.5%. So that's a 5% discrepancy, which is why these videos are important to understand the differences among the swing states. But what's more is that Kennedy can be a negative for Trump by up to 0.6 percentages, whereas he can be a boon for Trump as high as like 2.5% of a positive, which is interesting. So in this video, I proved that Donald Trump is benefiting very largely due to RFK being in the race, and that RFK, even if he gets less of a popular vote than what is showing on the polls, will still negatively affect Biden and could very well cost him the election. And on average, in swing states, RFK being on the ballot helps Trump out by anywhere from 1.5 to 2%, with the exception of Michigan, where he actually hurts him by 0.5%. So anyway, if you like the video, literally thumbs up it. Comment down below what you thought and any suggestions or any changes, and I'll be amenable to all of it. See y'all on the next one. Adios.